Welcome to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFD News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.
Hello and welcome back to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. We are back again. It is just the troublesome twosome of me and Francis this week. Sadly, Polly is not with us again, but we're going to do our best to give you all the best news and insights from the fintech world. And with that, Francis, how are you doing? How has your week been?
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, doing very well this week. It's been a very cold week, I will say. I think, I feel like a couple of weeks ago we were saying that summer had ended because people were now sending over a lot of press releases and news was crossing our desks, which wasn't as busy during summer, but now it feels like it's not summer because it's just freezing in the UK. It's really cold. But no, other than that, surviving the cold. It's been a very good week here at the Fintech Times, and yeah, this will be my last one for a while because I'm going on holiday next week. So I'm sort of gearing up for that, but very excited, and yeah, no, it's been a good week.
We will definitely miss you, man. And I think you're right about the cold. Today is definitely the first day that I've been I woke up and was just it's freezing today. Started shivering. But you're also right that the news has been picking up. We've had so many press releases and different announcements going on this week. It's been crazy trying to fit it all in. But with that, what news have you decided to bring to the table today?
So today I wanted to talk about financial well-being and some new research that Loqbox, the UK credit building business, has published.
Fantastic. And this week I am going to be talking about new research by Pay UK, the operator of the current account switch service, about a gap between how much people think they know about finance and the reality. And I feel like they're both a little bit linked there, sort of financial wellness and well-being and education. So why don't you take it away and lead us off with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the article today, as I mentioned, is from Loqbox, and it's about its new research, which reveals that despite the uptake in sort of fintech platforms and, how many programs we see or different applications that are launched about new fintechs, money still remains a very taboo topic, and it examined 150,000 respondents to understand which age groups were struggling the most when it comes to discussing finances, and it found that 54% of people in their 40s and 50s find money confusing. Meanwhile, only 49% of people in their 20s felt the same way. And interestingly, it was actually those aged between 18 and 24 who are actually speaking about finances more, and as a result, probably unsurprisingly to be honest, have a better understanding of financial matters. So Loqbox's research also reveals the potential long-term financial consequences of avoiding money conversations. So it found that 43% of people express worry when thinking about money, and that the lack of financial dialogue can contribute to poor financial decisions. And all of this can easily contribute to long-term financial instability and sort of stress and, increased psychological stress. So despite many avoiding these conversations, of those who do engage, 58% prefer to talk about money with friends, partners, or family. 16% seek advice from financial professionals like financial advisors. 8.5% confide in work colleagues. And 6% are more comfortable talking to people that they don't know very well about their finances, rather than close contacts. It's just interesting, I think, to see, because in our profession, we obviously talk about money and finances all the time, but I feel like it's weird to think about a world, I suppose, where that really isn't commonplace. And I try to think of my my life before this job and how much I actually spoke about, what the latest financial innovations were or what bank I was using with friends, family, and so on. And it is true, I feel like it wasn't mentioned that much. Perhaps when sort of Monzo and Starling really came onto the scene, people were like, have you tried out this new sort of challenger bank? It's really good, and there's an easy way to send money, or people were saying it was sort of like a PayPal replacement or something along those lines. But truthfully, I don't think I can understand why people don't talk about it. And I feel like it can be quite embarrassing as well, because people feel, perhaps ashamed that they don't earn as much as they wish they did, or, their spending habits aren't very good. And I can understand why it remains taboo, but similarly, it doesn't really come as any surprise to me that the people who are sort of most in the know about their finances are those that talk about it the most. So I really wanted to sort of discuss with you today is, are you sort of the same? Before this job, did you not really talk about finance all that much? And because of the job, I suppose, have you seen sort of that influence other people who perhaps might not have talk about finances as much? I don't know. Like, it's just an interesting thought, because I feel like when people say to me, what's your job? Oh, I do fintech. So then we actually talk about it a little bit more. So I don't know if that's an interesting sort of segue to it or not.
I don't know really. I mean, I've always been someone that's been very open about, whenever I did previous jobs to this one, I was always like just telling people, this is what I earn. What do you earn? I was always really interested in what people are earning, basically. And then, like, if no one, if people don't want to tell you, I get that, because I know some people are very much of this mindset of, my finances are my personal, that's my information, that's for me to know, and not you. And I completely get that. But I definitely do think there's so much value in talking to, your friends or people you work with about your finances, whether it be your salary or just generic, talking about bank accounts and things. I think about the fact that, I've been a journalist at the Fintech Times now for well over 2 years. And yet when I meet up with my friends, and if someone says, oh, I've got this bank account, whatever, I often find myself learning about, different options, different offerings from banks that, potentially I would think, oh, I must know most of them now because it's my job. I go through them every day. But it just goes to show there's so much to learn, and so many new kind of offerings from banks and new fintechs that are emerging. It is impossible to keep up with all of them. And by talking to people, I think something as well is that you often trust what your friends say. You know where they're coming from. They know they're being honest with you about things, and therefore are much more likely to try an offering from a fintech or a bank if they've used it and they said it was good for them and they recommend it to me. Whereas, if you just find it naturally through the fintech or bank advertising or any other means, I think you're less likely to go, oh yeah, I'll just give that a go, because what's the harm? So I think there's so much value in speaking to people, about finance, and, whether it's about your specific financial situation or just generic kind of new launches or advancements or offerings. I think there is so much value in that. And especially when it comes to, seeking advice. I remember when I was looking last year at different savings accounts, and if I met up with friends, I was just like, oh, what is your savings account? And you realize there's so many different kind of things that people have that they use or have used in the past, that when I was just searching online for different options, I hadn't even come across. And I just think, regardless of the situation, whether you're talking about salary, which can also be good to know if you're falling behind colleagues and things like that, or if it's just generic offerings, it's always good to talk about it. And while I do understand this kind of taboo around finance and talking about money, and there is that level of, perhaps you feel like you might be judged for talking about certain aspects of your finance, or, you find it a bit stressful to talk about it. I think it is important to keep in mind that there is so much that you can gain from it, and the other person you're talking to can gain from it as well. And I think if there was a more open dialogue about finance, just in general, kind of culturally, I feel like a lot of people would probably be in a better situation than find themselves in, especially when it comes to their personal finance. So yeah, I'm all for it, to be honest. I'm all for everyone chatting and sharing their information.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's like interesting as well, because if we take your situation, for example, where let's say you wanted to change, like you said last year, that you were looking for like a new savings account. Let's say, for example, you were stressed about it because your current banking provider, the offering that they had wasn't very good, or you weren't eligible for it, or whatever the reason. I mean, you sort of just explained it there perfectly, but by talking to friends and family and, financial advisors or whoever it might be, you just sort of see the actual scope of how many different options are actually out there and available to consumers. And then it just sort of creates this idea of, actually, yeah, what I'm with right now might not be great, but there is something, out there for me which will be like the perfect solution. And I think in that regard, it just goes to show as to why conversation and sort of discussions around finance are so important, and why people shouldn't have this sort of taboo about it. Because I do think it's quite old fashioned, this idea of, we can't talk about money, it's got to be very hush hush, whoever earns, or, however much I earn is up to me and stuff like that. Like that part, I understand. People might not want to share that. But at the same time, I feel like if somebody is seeking help, then people should also be able to sort of think, right, I'm happy to sort of not share everything, of course, like keep some, you don't need to say exactly how much money is in your bank account, but say, these are the perks of the one that I'm with, or, this is what I looked out for, these were the options I saw. I don't know, I feel like just the more discussion there is, the more people become aware to the different options that are available to them. And as we always say, the more payment options we always say it with payments, but the more sort of alternative payment options that are available, and in this case, sort of like the more banking options and sort of financial options, sort of more generally, I suppose, the better. And I really do think that is the case here. And I think it's interesting to sort of see that there is a correlation between stress and a discussion around finance really, as a more general topic. But with that, why don't we go over to your article?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, my article kind of links in quite nicely with this discussion because we know financial well-being can be very closely linked to financial education and financial literacy. And basically, Pay UK have conducted a big survey and some research and found that 78% of UK adults consider themselves to be financially literate, but a similar proportion, about 71%, actually don't even know how a savings account works. And it just goes to show there's a huge disparity between what people think they know about finance and the reality. And if, like I said, last year I was looking for a savings account, and if it's something that, you don't even know how it works, it's quite a basic way to manage your money and keep your savings and try and, gain interest on that. And if people don't know how they work or the benefits they offer, that's, I'd say, one of the core sort of things in finance to know about. And yet people clearly are struggling to comprehend that as well. So Pay UK basically revealed that financial literacy alone doesn't always safeguard individuals from financial difficulties, and that among those who view themselves as financially literate, 19% still run out of money every single month. And this figure climbs to 41% for those who don't consider themselves literate financially. Even among respondents who feel confident in their ability to manage finances, around 27% find themselves running out of money up to every 2 months. Now, while these findings paint a bit of a dire picture, especially in the UK, 28% of adults here still manage to save regularly with a plan for rainy days, and just 6% don't save any money at all, which is obviously quite a small proportion, but in the grand scheme of things, still quite a lot of people aren't saving and aren't putting any money aside every month. Now, John Dentry, who's the product owner at Pay UK, said that the findings highlight the gap between perceived financial literacy and practical knowledge, as well as the strong desire for more financial education. In a challenging economic environment, it's more important than ever to ensure that people across the UK have access to the education and resources so they can feel more assured about managing their finances effectively. And he goes on to explain that, from the understanding the basics of savings accounts to navigating more complex products like ISAs, he said there's a clear demand for better financial literacy initiatives across all age groups. And, this is something we speak about so often, not only on the podcast, but in our articles at the Fintech Times. And I think it just goes to show, as we always say, there just aren't enough financial education offerings exist in the UK. You don't get enough in school, and that while there have been sort of the first steps towards introducing it to schools, we still don't have a fully fledged, financial education offering in school, whether it be primary or secondary. And I think that it goes to show that we are still a long way from giving people, as he says, the education and resources they need to really manage that. And really, the reason I wanted to bring this to the table is just because I think the awareness of this, first of all, is really important. But also to get your take on just the story overall, find out whether you were surprised by some of the stats that Pay UK revealed, and just your thoughts on, what the kind of solution is to tackling these kind of really big problems when it comes to finance.
In terms of actually a solution, I don't think I have one that's sort of revolutionary, because I feel like what I think has already been said, which is, it's very similar, in fact, to sort of the article that I picked earlier. It is just about this greater discussion. And again, I think your story about choosing the savings account and sort of discussing it with people is just the perfect analogy for what we're trying to say, which is, by discussing the different options that other people are already using, in addition to your own research, you're going to be sort of have your eyes open to so many different possibilities there. And I think that is just really, I don't know, like, it just seems like that has to be the best way forward. And I think one thing that I did find very surprising, though, was this stat where it said there is a strong demand for more support with personal finance education within school years, with 86% of UK adults agreeing it should be on the national curriculum. For me, that's a no-brainer. What I found quite interesting is, what are the 14% of people who don't think it should be on there? What's their logic? Because I just don't get that. Like, is that just sort of the rich trying to stay rich and the poor staying poor? Because in my head, I feel like when we're talking about financial inclusion and financial accessibility, there's no better financial accessibility than being at school and learning about, these different financial options. It's the perfect time for it. It means that you don't necessarily need to have the drive and initiative that some people might have when they're older and others might not, if you know what I mean. Like, I feel like, as we sort of discussed already, money can be a bit of a taboo topic, and depending on people's upbringing, they might not want to sort of look into these options, or they might not think those options are available to them for whatever reason. But if they learn about these things in school, they can sort of almost have it forced upon them, I suppose, that there is this knowledge and there is this sort of availability to them. I don't know, it's just, I found it weird that 14% of people don't think it should be in schools. That I just thought that was weird.
No, I definitely agree. And yeah, I think you're right. It's not something that occurs to me. I think often when you read stats and you see 85 to 90%, you just think, oh, basically everyone. But 14% is still a fair sort of proportion of people that are saying, oh yeah, I don't think people should learn about their finances in schools, or learn more about their finances in schools. Which, yeah, as you said, is a bit of a surprising take. But I completely agree with you that the sort of value that is in financial education, and that, what I would personally like to see, more government initiatives to try and introduce that, whether it be in schools or outside, really just try and, like you said, enforce financial education on people of not necessarily even school age, but just of all ages, and see if there's any sort of interesting initiatives that could come in that support that. And just before we move on, I think one of the things that sort of I picked out was a quote from Alistair Douglas, who's the CEO of Totally Money. And he explained that for years, the big banks have used people's data for their own benefit, and it was never clear how or why they made the decisions they made. And he says they need to improve transparency, rebuild trust, and put people in control of their financial futures. And I think this was a really interesting point because, obviously banks, and as we spoke about last week, I think it was, credit reports aren't always the most transparent. And this can lead to a lot of confusion and people not really knowing where they stand. And it also leaves people knowing they don't know how to improve their situation because they're not being given the feedback. They don't know how these banks and financial institutions come to their final decisions when it comes to lending, or it comes to offering them different accounts and things like that. And I feel like potentially there's a long way to go, is these financial institutions being more transparent and also offering these kind of education initiatives themselves. And I think there's a long way to go with that. And yeah, I just think overall that's a huge part of it. The industry itself, the banks, the financial institutions, the fintechs probably do need to take a step forward themselves and just say, listen, we accept responsibility, and we think that's a hugely important thing that we're going to try and help with.
Another thing just on that, I think, which is probably worth mentioning, is the way in which it's enforced. I feel like it's that saying, isn't it, that you can sort of take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And it's like you can give all the information to people, but you can't make them learn it. And I feel like if you want people to really sort of pick up a sort of a new way to do things, it needs to be an interactive lesson almost. It needs to be something that isn't just sit down and read, scroll on your phone for 3 minutes while you read these like paragraphs that just probably aren't very inspiring, to be honest. And I remember there was a while ago when I was using a crypto platform, they had this sort of like reward scheme where if you looked up what the latest education point was, you got rewarded with a few like small, not a lot, just a few points that you could then convert into some of its native crypto token and stuff like that. And I just thought it's quite interesting that, there's different ways to make, for people that think, oh, this would be this crypto token's going to take off. Just by going on and reading this page, you're earning potentially money. And I think if organizations can take that approach where it's people feel like they're gaining something more than just the information, then that's probably a good way forwards as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it actually reminds me of our latest spotlight, which our editor Claire produced, which is all about a new kids finance app called Sunshine and Kittens, which is obviously a great name for any finance app. But and their whole mission is, they're still launching, they're still in the process of creating their product and launching it to the market. But their whole mission is to really gamify the sort of financial education experience for kids. And I think that, like you said, it goes a long way. It's all about how you present the information. And, it's all well and good saying, oh, we should just create a section in mathematics, or we should have a money lesson in school. How far will that actually go? If kids are just sitting there and then their teacher's going, and here's what an ISA is, and here's what a savings account is, and blah, blah, blah. I potentially, for a lot of people, that wouldn't go in, and it wouldn't be very helpful anyway. And, like you said, I do think there's a lot of value in just saying, yeah, there's here's our information, but we're presenting it in a fun way, or a way that gives you rewards, like you were saying. And I think that's and also another great way to really go about it. But with that, I think we've covered those stories very, very nicely and wrapped them up well. And as always, if you liked any of the news or insights we spoke about today, or want to read more or check out any of the other going-ons in the fintech world, then make sure you head on over to the fintechtimes.com. And that brings us on to our final segment of the podcast. Now, as you know by now, so much news and insights cross our desks each and every week. We like to pick out something a little extra to share with our listeners. So with that, Francis, what have you learned this week?
So this week I learned that friendly fraud is costing UK merchants £128 million per year, according to Chargebacks 911.
Fantastic. And I have been reading up on the UK government's plans to delay payments by up to 72 hours in a move to prevent fraud, and basically give banks powers to just hold on to payments, say, we're going to look into this more to try and prevent fraud. And I'd be interested to hear our viewers' thoughts on, the impact of this, and what kind of impact this could have by introducing more friction to payments in the UK, whether you think this is a good thing for fraud, or whether it could be negative overall. But with that, thank you very much for joining us. I think we've done a very good job with that, Polly, again, and we'll definitely be missing you for the coming weeks. But I hope you enjoy your holiday and your trip away. We will miss you, and we will be back next week, hopefully, for all you listeners.
Normally I think I'd say see you next week, but see you probably in almost a month's time now, I suppose. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Don't miss next week's episode, and continue the conversation using #TFT News and Views, and follow us at the Fintech Times.